Hi, good evening. I'm Patricia Van Skyke and I'm director of the Lloyd Library and Museum. I'd like to welcome you to tonight's program, Medical Botany, How Plants and Their Compounds Can Heal Us. This is our first in-person program accompanying our exhibition, American Medicine at the Crossroads, and I hope you had an opportunity to view it either another time or tonight. In the 19th and early 20th century, several competing approaches to medicine were jockeying to become the dominant school of medical thought. Some of the contenders, who were referred to as reformed, or what today we might call alternative medicine, emphasized herbal treatments. The other did not. Spoiler alert, the herbal approach did not win. However, plants continued to be an important part of drug formulary. And as you know, the idea of nature as medicine did not go away, and in fact reemerged. So much so that today conventional medical practitioners are often integrating natural approaches to treating diseases. We are pleased to have with us tonight Professor Theresa Culley, who is the interim dean for the University of Cincinnati's College of Natural Resources. Did I get it? Close enough. Okay. Present tonight's lecture. She's taught medical botany for over 30 years, a course that she team teaches with Dr. Eric Tepe, who, by the way, is on the Lloyd Library Board of Directors. And that class is one of the most popular upper-level elective classes for students in the biology department. Dr. Culley's primary research focuses on conservation biology of endangered plant species, as well as invasive ornamental species. Her work makes an impact from informing legislation that protects our forests and environments to persuading me to remove a calorie tree from my yard. I have no doubt that I'll leave tonight's program with equally valuable insights. Please join me in offering a warm welcome to Professor Theresa Culley.
Thank you so much, Patricia. All right, I have my mic on. Hopefully that works for you all. All right. Well, thank you very much for that introduction. And so what I'm going to do today is to give you a brief-ish foray into medical botany. And again, as Patricia had mentioned, this is a course that I co-teach with, we're going to move this, with Eric Tepe. And we will make this work. And so, of course, there's Eric, if you've never seen him before. He periodically goes down to South America to do some collecting trips, and this is on one of his trips. He sent this picture back to me, and I thought it was great. In this, he's trying to portray his idol, who's one of the historical ethnobotanists of the time. All right. So when I was preparing for this talk, I was thinking, wait, I've talked to Lloyd several times, and so I wanted to double check and make sure I haven't given this talk before. And so it so happens in 2019, I gave a talk on cannabis, and then psilocybin, we're talking about magic mushrooms and those types of things. And so that's in 2023. And so you'll notice that these are cases of medical plants. And so that's the talks that I gave, but this time I'm going to give you a larger overview. And we're going to touch on the history of medical botany. We're going to talk about the aspect of herbalism. But what I want to show you today, and hopefully I'll convince you by the end of this talk, is that plants are really strong chemical factories from which we can gather new information and new drugs that can be developed for use all around the world. And so that's what we're going to do. Okay, so if we think about modern medical treatment today, and I asked you, and I do this with my students, I say, what do you think about, what's your experience of medicine? If you get sick, you go to the doctor, it's a nice pristine place, you might get a test, in this case, like a MRI or something. They might prescribe pills that you take. This is the view that we think, at least that I think of the world today. But the important thing to think about is only 20% of our world's population have this view of medicine. You go to a doctor, you get diagnosed, you get treated, you take your pills, whatever, surgery. That is only 20% of the world's population, including, of course, the US and most of Europe. However, what we need to remember is that's not all the case. So this is a set of slides that I love. Eric and I showed this in our class on the very first day. And it's asking the question, what is medicine? This was a National Geographic study where they actually went to different places around the world and they asked people to go into their medicine cabinets and to show them what they use for medicine. So here is Switzerland. This is sort of fun because you'll see it in different parts of the world. And so here's this couple here, and if you look, it's a bunch of different packets. Here's Advil, right? So some of this might look familiar. And so that's what they have. That's what they view medicine. Okay, so now we're going to go to Latvia, another part of the world, and disregard what looks like Sasquatch in the back there. I don't know what's going on. So if you haven't seen it, so we're in the right window there. But here you'll see their view of medicine is very different. You have all these plant extracts that you might use for various types of illnesses or different diseases or situations you might have. Okay, here's the best one. So here's the US. Yeah, and there's the dog on the counter, which is sort of funny, notwithstanding her shirt. But here you see, again, all these different pills, protein powders, things like this. This is what they view as medicine. Okay, now let's shift a little bit, and we're going to go to India. So India, same thing, but you could see it's slightly different now. There's some pills there, but they might not look that familiar to you. And now we're going to go a little further away, and we're going to go to Haiti. This is completely different. So if you go to Haiti and you travel there and you get sick, and you go to the doctor, you're going to have a much different experience than you have here in the United States, right? So that's what we're looking at. So what it comes down to is, again, 80% of the world's population are used to this other form of medical treatment that's based in plants. And so it's called traditional medical treatment. And here's different pictures here. You can see on the upper right is in China. You would go to essentially a pharmacy, I guess we would call it, but it would be a bunch of different drawers and different things of dried plant parts. It could be animal parts as well. But you would say, I have a cold, and then the doctor there essentially would mix up something for you and tell you how to take it. And so that, again, is traditional medicine, is very different than what we have here. And so that's important to talk about. So a lot of people think about this as an either or. So it's modern versus traditional medicine. But what I want to show you today is that modern medicine and traditional medicine actually have many similarities, including going back in history. And I would argue, if we're here in the modern medicine world, there's a lot that we can glean and gain from knowledge in traditional medicine. So that's where we're going to go. So if we think about this, and we think about through time, it does turn out that plants were used historically for medical treatment well before what we would call the modern era, in the United States and in Europe, for that matter. So in fact, and you'll notice I love history. So if we go back to medieval days and even colonial days here in North America, what would happen was doctors treated patients with plants. So in colonial days, the doctor would be on horseback. He might go over to a log cabin. Someone's sick, scarlet fever or ill or broke a leg. And usually it was a he in that case, would then go out into the field nearby and look for certain plants. Oh, here's that, there's that. Okay, I'm going to bring it back. I'm going to steep and make a tea for you to take, or a poultice that you would put on a wound perhaps. And so that was normal. That was what happened all the time. Even here in the United States and in Europe in the 18 to 1900s, if you were a doctor and you were trained as an MD, doctors at that time were expected to take classes in botany to learn about plants. And so that was a thing that was very important. Now today, I would argue we've gotten away from that. But that again, doctors had they had to have a basic foundation in plants and their uses to treat humans. So what I want to do is step even further back, and I'm going to take you on a little history journey. And what I want to show you is that we can go to various parts around the world And plants have been so important in medical treatment in those areas. So we're going to start in China, in ancient China. At the time, there was a emperor known as Emperor Shenzong, and he was an amazing person. Around 2700 BC, so this is a long time ago, he essentially came up with a bunch of knowledge and ideas that was passed orally down through the generations, but it was known as the first herbal, a great herbal. And so it's known as the pensao. Now, what Emperor Shenzong did, again, I think is awfully amazing. Again, the knowledge was passed on orally for centuries. The book, as you will, was published finally in 1600. But what this emperor did was he was a firm believer in the power of plants, and he would use himself as a guinea pig, and he would try all different types of plants. And it's a miracle he did not die, because as we'll talk later on, plants can be poisonous. And so this herbal that he has contains 365 plants. And so this is just a sampling of them: opium, ephedra, hemp, and chalmugra. You might be familiar with opium, but of course that's where we get morphine, which is used today, and you can play around in the lab and change it to different forms like Vicodin, for example. Ephedra, we get ephedrine, and that's of course very important nowadays, oftentimes used for asthma. In the past it was used for weight loss, and that was a mistake. We can talk about that later. Hemp is cannabis. So hemp is not marijuana. That was my other talk. But they're both the same species, or people argue they're slightly different species, but it's cannabis. Hemp is more of the fiber. It makes rope. It makes clothing at that time. They didn't have cotton. It was hemp. And then chalmugra is interesting. Chalmugra is actually a compound that later on was identified as an oil that was found to be the cure for leprosy. And in the 1800s, Western doctors discovered this as the cure for leprosy. And you're like, okay, but, 2700 BC, the Chinese actually discovered that first. So that is what it is. And leprosy, of course, is also known as Hansen's disease. You might know that. And then, okay, so that's China. Let's go to Egypt. A lot of people are aware that the Egyptians had a wonderful way to use plants for medical treatment. And that's actually highly detailed in what's known as the Ebers Papyrus, which actually is about 70 feet in length. It's a papyrus that's written. Here's a portion of it. It has some wonderful artwork in it, too. But this Ebers Papyrus is thought to have originated around 1500 BC, so we're still talking a long time ago. And in this, it actually does list 850 plants. That's a lot, but it does more than list those. It actually talks about how you prepare those plants, how you apply them, how you do remedies. And so if we look there, it talks about mandrake. We're going to talk about that in just a moment. Aloe vera, a lot of people know about that one. Ancient Egyptians were on it first. Castor bean, opium, garlic, wine, all these different things. Wine, of course, is from plants, right? Grapes, okay. And so furthermore, this document, I'm going to call it document, had chapters on how to treat patients. So they had chapters on what to do with your intestines, diseases of the intestines, ophthalmology, your eyes, dermatology, gynecology, contraception. They were talking about how you do contraception back then, dentistry, tumors, and it goes on and on and on. So again, the ancient Egyptians were onto something way before Western medicine was like, hey, we have the answer for you. So that's interesting. Okay, now we're going to zoom on over to India. In India, there's a document known as the Rig Veda, and this is a sacred Sanskrit verse. And so again, this is about the same time period, around 1500 BC, so a long time ago. And this details medical information. Now this piece is the basis for Ayurvedic medicine. And so if anyone has been to India, or you're of Indian origin, or you have Indian friends, you're aware, hopefully, of Ayurvedic medicine, which is still very predominant today. It's practiced by many Hindu communities. Whenever I teach this class, I always have students who themselves or their families or friends have been or do practice Ayurvedic medicine here today. So an example of this is this particular plant. I'm going to start showing you plant pictures because we got to. This is known as snake root, Rafflesia serpentina. So serpentina, snake, so that's why like snake root. And this one, in the Ayurvedic system of medicine, it's used to treat snake bite, and we'll talk about more about why the snake connection in a moment, but also mental illness. So they were already working on that. Today, we actually use this plant to develop and to extract out reserpine, which is a compound that's used in the treatment today. And we'll might get back to that in a moment. So again, the point is that many of these ancient texts talked about plants and treatments that are still relevant today. Okay, now we're going to zoom on over to Mexico because everyone's like focused on the other part of the world. It turns out that there was known as this, it's known as the Aztec herbal. It was produced in 1552 by Martin de la Cruz, who, that's of course the Spanish name, but he was an Aztec physician, and he wrote this herbal trying to describe what plants were used in Aztec medicine. That herbal at the time was taken by probably the Jesuit missionaries of the time and sent to the Vatican, you know, as a gift. And so it stuck, it was there for centuries, literally. It was rediscovered in 1929. You can imagine what a wonderful, like someone going through the dusty, I'm like, what is this? And then it was translated 10 years later. And so these are some images taken from it. First of all, they're gorgeous, if you see that. And then there's also the Aztec language there. So the very interesting thing about this is that it includes 180, again, American species now. We're not talking European. But some of these species are known, but others are a complete mystery because the illustrations, and if you read this, it says glaucoma. That's interesting. Well, okay, the scientist in me, I have to keep that apart. And so glaucoma, if you know anything about that, we don't have a lot of treatments. We have some, but here, the ancient Aztecs actually had some treatment with this plant. We don't know what the plant is because we don't know the name. We're like looking at the picture, trying to figure out what that is. And so some of these plants are complete mystery, so which I find completely fascinating. Okay, now we're going to zoom on over to ancient Greece. Greece had a lot going on at the time. Around 100 AD, Dioscorides, he was actually a surgeon. He was a Greek surgeon in Emperor Nero's army. Remember Nero, evil Nero? Okay. So Dioscorides would travel around with the Roman Empire, and he got to see all these different areas, talk to different physicians in those areas. And so he wrote a text known as De Materia Medica, and it was essentially, this is a printed version later on after the printing press. But at the time, it's translated painstakingly by monks, right, with these illustrations. And so in this text, he details the properties, the use, how to grow 600 different plant species, which is amazing. This text was viewed as so important, it was translated into several different languages, including Arabic and Persian. And again, he had a lot of descriptions of the plants, but he talked about how to give them to a patient, their uses, expected results, and also side effects. So up to then, a lot of people, they didn't talk about side effects. He did. So, and some of these are still in use. So he was talking about, you know, willow bark tea. Indigenous communities here in North America also independently figured out willow bark tea was really important, which I think, again, really interesting. And today we know that's the precursor to aspirin. So this herbal alone was so important, it formed the basis of medicine in Europe for the next 1,000 years. So 1,000 years later, people are pulling this up and looking through it and trying to find information. I think that's amazing. So here's an example. He also did something where he had what's called botanical nuances. So he's looking at the time of day and the flowering stage can influence the medical potency of a plant. So a really great example here is opium poppy. So if you take opium poppy, and what we're doing, I'm going to try to rock close and make sure it doesn't squeal. There's the capsule. You cut it, and the latex comes out. You collect that, and you get the opium from that. So what he found out and discovered and reported, and we know this is true today, is if you collect that capsule in the morning, you get 4 times more opium out of it than in the evening, because the plant is just trying to ramp up its protective compounds. We'll get to that in a moment. Early in the morning, it's like everything's working, it's photosynthesizing, and later in the day it ramps everything back down. So I don't want to give you the impression that the Greeks had it all figured out. In ancient Persia, there was also a surgeon known as Avicenna, and he, you can see the dates that he lived, again, a long time ago, but he wrote what was known as the Canon of Medicine. And this is also used for the next 500 years, so really influential. A lot of people don't think about Persia at all, but what's really important is that this document alone was then translated back into many of the Greek and Roman texts and used in the Roman Empire. So that, I think, is fascinating. The other thing is a lot of folks, including my students, don't realize that around this time period, if you wanted to be at the center point of medicine, you would not be in Rome, you would not be in all these other places in China, you would actually be in Baghdad. So in Baghdad, in the 8th century, for example, that's where the first drugstores were developed, in Baghdad. So the Persians were well ahead of anyone else at that time period in medical knowledge. So really, really fascinating. Here's just a book from his text. These are just some images of the plants. And so again, I think those are so beautiful. So the other thing that happened is, now we're moving on to the medieval period, is there was what was known as the doctrine of signatures. And so this is the idea that if you look at a plant, the plant, well in this case God, the Almighty, is then telling you how that plant is useful to treat humans. So the idea is the Almighty must have put clues into plants as a means of curing the diseases which he created. So the idea here is that if you have a problem with your brain, I don't know what it could be, like depression, melancholy, they would call it back then, a tumor, I don't know what, then you need to eat walnuts. Because you look at a walnut, right? It looks like a brain. So this makes sense.
Did it work?
In some cases it does work. In some cases not. I'm going to show you some cases where it doesn't. But this is interesting because sometimes it does. So the definition of the doctrine of signatures really is that the medicinal use of a plant can be detected through what they call signatures. So clues in the shape of what it looked like, the texture, the taste even, the color, those types of things. So here is what it isn't. So here's an idea that if you look at grasses and you look at their roots, and if the root looks like a hand, oh, that's something for your hand. I don't know, arthritis, dermatitis, something with your hand, that would be good. And then here's another set of plants used for scorpion stings because they have the fruit structures that looks like a scorpion tail. So again, I don't think that worked, but you know, it's an idea. Okay, here's a fun one. How many of you have heard about the mandrake? A few, okay. Okay. So for those of you who know, just hold tight. The others who don't know, this is great. So the mandrake is Mandragoria officinarum is the species name. And so that's what it looks like, a cute little plant. If you pull it up, it has this funky rooting structure. And I don't know, it's sort of carrot-like, but not. People pull this up and they're like, oh, it looks like a human, right? It looks sort of like a person. And so back then in the medieval period, they actually looked at this plant. They said, oh my gosh. Furthermore, they said there's males and females depending upon the fruits. If the fruit is nice and round, that's male. If it's like pear-shaped, like a pear, that's female. Which actually is pretty insightful because if you think about a pear in the form of the uterus, anyways. But what they said was, okay, because of the doctrine of signatures and this thing looks like a human form, this means that this plant favors fertility. So if you have someone who's having difficult conceiving, male or female, like if it's a male, hey, give them the male version. If it's a female, give the female version. Furthermore, this plant became so popular and valued that people had to create urban myths about it to protect other people from stealing their mandrakes. So here's some images. You can see this all throughout the literature. And so one thing you'll notice, first of all, in the upper right, you'll see a mandrake with a little person right there. And then what you'll notice is there's a rope tied around the mandrake, and it goes to a dog. And the bottom one here, slightly different, but you'll see the mandrake tied to the dog. And the idea here is that a person, you'd have to take a sword and move it around 3 times in the westward direction or something, but you would tie your dog to this mandrake. You would actually, you can't see it here, but he's putting wax in his ears. Because the urban myth was the minute you rip the mandrake up from the earth, it will scream and it will drive you mad. This is a pretty good effective way of protecting your plant if you think about it. So the idea is you tie your dog there, you put the wax in there, and you walk away, and you're like, hey, Fido, come this way. And they come running towards you, and they rip up the plant, right? And so that's how they protected their plants. And so through the different types of years and different modes of literature, you can see this popping up again and again. So here's from the Bible, from the Christian Bible, from Genesis. And this is a story, if you remember, those of you might be familiar with this. Rachel and Leah had married sisters who had been married to Jacob, and they were sort of fighting over him. And so what happens here is in the days of the wheat harvest, Reuben, who's the daughter of Leah, he went out and found mandrakes in the field and brought them to his mother Leah. Then Rachel said to Leah, hey, please give me some of your son's mandrakes. But she said to her, is it a small matter that you've taken away my husband? Would you take away my son's mandrakes also? Rachel said, then he may lie with you tonight in exchange for your son's mandrakes. So she's making a bargain. So if you look, you can find this. But the whole deal about the mandrakes here is because they favored fertility. And so the idea here is that in this case, Rachel she hadn't been conceiving a child at that point. So she's like, hey, give me these mandrakes and I'll consume them, and that will make me fertile, and hopefully I will conceive a child. And she actually did. So that's that. Okay, now let's shift gears. Romeo and Juliet. So if you're familiar with that, there's a whole part in there, Act 4, Scene 3, where Juliet says, alack, alack, it is not like that I, so early waking, what with lonesome smells and shrieks like mandrakes torn out of the earth, that living mortals hearing them run mad. So again, that's where it comes back to. And then of course, more recently, if you ever look at Harry Potter, this is why. And if you look at Harry Potter and the kids in that, there's poor little Ron, right? They have the ear muffs on. And that's because of the shrieks. So again, this whole idea still perpetuates today. Okay, well, is there any value to this plant, right? There is. So if we go back to our good old friend, the Greek Dioscorides, 1st century AD, he also had a surgical anesthetic is how he used this plant. So what they would do is they would take the mandrake, take an extract of it, spush it up a little bit, get some liquid out of that, and put it into wine. And a patient who was about to have a surgery, because you want to be knocked out, right? They would consume that, and that would be an anesthetic. Pretty effective. It's also a poison. So good old the Borgias used fermented mandrake to kill people. And so one of the things they did was they had a ring, and you would put a little bit of fermented mandrake in there, and you'd close it up. And so you'd be at a dinner, and you'd be next to someone you don't like, and when they're not looking, you would reach over and open your little ring and drop it in their wine. And Agrippina, the wife of Claudius, actually killed her nephew that way. So one thing we'll be talking about in a little bit is what Eric likes to call dosage, dosage, dosage. So plant compounds are entirely potent and can be very helpful medicinally, but they can also kill you. So it all depends on the dosage, really. So a small amount can be good. A large amount is enough to tip you over the edge. I always tell people don't make a botanist mad, especially if they know about medical botany, because we can kill you in many different ways that are undetectable. You didn't hear it from me. So there's a lot of active components in this plant. If we start to be like, what's going on? And we can use our chemistry to look at it. The plant itself is packed full of a compound here, and I'm going to be showing you some pictures of compounds. I like to do this to show you like it's a thing, it's a chemical. And this is known as hyoscine. Another name for it is scopolamine. And scopolamine is actually, if you ever take the motion sickness patches that you can buy in the stores, and you can put it, wherever, and sometimes you can put them here, it actually is a depressant of the central nervous system. And so it prevents seasickness, things like that. So it's oftentimes used in motion sickness patches, also still used today as a sedative before surgery. So it still is important today. So again, really, really fascinating. So again, my point is, and you'll see a few more examples of this, and this is just one, is that plants are really chemical factories. They're packed full of different types of chemicals that can affect us in different ways. And so why? Well, I put this together to remind ourselves that plants are stuck, right? They can't move. They are growing in one spot. They somehow got there. The seed landed there. It germinated. They cannot move like an animal. Like, oh, this isn't great. I'm going to pick up my roots and run. That's not an option. So they are stuck there. And so in order to deal with all of these things coming at them, whether it's an herbivore, be it a cow, a big ungulate, or a caterpillar, viruses that attack, maybe it's really dry in that area, maybe the sun is really burning, plants actually can produce different type of compounds that shield them from UV. And then also, oftentimes there's competition for light. You're elbowing yourself out against other plants who are trying to take over your shade. And so a lot of this, plants have had to develop through evolutionary time the ability to produce these compounds to compete in this really crazy, harsh world because they can't pick up and run. And so what they do is through compounds, chemicals. So what I want to do is, like normally in class, I would be bringing a bunch of things around. I'd be having everyone sniffing and stuff. So I'm going to try to sort of give you a little bit of that. So an orange peel, right? So think about what that orange peel smells like. If you do it first thing in the morning, pull it off, and you smell that orange smell. So what you're smelling is terpenine. So this is the compound that that smell is. I can make that in the lab and give it to you, and you'd be like, someone peeled an orange. And so that's what it is. So here's another one, mint. Think about mint, minty. So menthol is actually this compound. So we can make that, and you would be like, mint. Here's another one, pine trees, Christmas, right? And so pinene. So this one's a little bit more complicated. It's not, now we're starting to get complicated. We're getting some ladders. If you've never seen these before, so this ring structure, each one, I'm going to be like a contortionist, is a carbon, and they're all connected together, and there's some double bonds and single bonds and so forth. It gets really exciting. And then capsaicin, like if you ever have hot peppers and you like, oh my God, that's burning my mouth. And so that's what that is. So these are different types of smells. Okay, anyone cut their grass? You get that cut grass smell, right? Actually, there you go, it's hexanal. And so we now know these plants are producing these compounds out into the air, into the ground. And so plants, again, are chemical factories. We're very limited in our senses. We can see things. Our noses are actually pretty good. And that's what plants are doing. Okay, here's another fun one. I don't know if you guys have ever smelled sandalwood. It's like made in some of you are saying yes, in soaps and different things like that. I personally don't like the smell, but my husband has it in his body wash thing, and it really bothers me. I have to go swap it out one day. But anyway, so if we have sandalwood, see, that's the different compound. And what's known as a stereoisomer, if you've just switched the three-dimensional configuration of the compound. So now we're going to switch that, what we call a hydroxyl group, this OH, and we're going to shift it up. And now that is the smell of green tomatoes. So sandalwood and green tomatoes are the same thing. It's just one part of that molecule is flipped. Isn't that amazing? So in the lab, we can start to tinker with things if we want to. And so that's what people do, is they find a compound that they think is going to be effective in treating, I don't know, cancer. And then you could say, hey, I want to try to make it more effective. I'm going to add in this extra group, or I'm going to twist this around, and I'm going to see what it does. And so that's what we can do in the lab nowadays. Okay, I want to give you a few fun stories. And one, I want to show you the power of these protective compounds. This is the story of wild potato. Eric would love this because he studies solanum. And so there's many different species. This is one of them. This plant, I think, is really amazing and smart, if I can call a plant smart. So what happens is when it's under attack by aphids, they flock to it, they're sucking the plant juices, they're weakening that plant. The plant itself will release a compound called this beta fascinine, and you can see what it is there. And it sends that out into the air. This is the smart part. It turns out that that exact same compound that the plant is releasing is the same thing that the aphids release when they're attacked by a predator. So the plant's sending out this compound, the aphids are sitting there going, oh my God, someone's after us, and they flee. That is smart, if I can call plant smart. Okay, we're going to take it a step further. Let's talk about good old corn, normal corn, ZMAs. So corn, especially around in our area, it's one of the corn and soybean are the primary crops. The corn can be attacked by what's known as armyworms, and they burrow through the main stem, they ruin the corn piece, they're just a mess. So when corn gets attacked by these armyworms, they release a volatile chemical into the air. Sort of like the same example we just had, but in this case, it's not mimicking any alarm calls of the armyworm. Rather, that chemical is a pheromone, it's called a pheromone, that attracts a female parasitic wasp, who's the predator of the armyworm. So the plant is like, I'm under attack, sending out this chemical, come help me. And the predator of this is this little tiny parasitic wasp. And she will find the armyworm, the caterpillar, and she will insert her ovipositor into it and lay eggs within the body of the caterpillar. Sounds gross to us. Here's the other part. Poor caterpillar, because what happens are those little eggs hatch and eat the caterpillar from the inside out. So the caterpillar is toast after a while. But again, an elegant series of chemicals that the plant is doing. I mean, if you think about this. Okay, so again, plants are chemical factories. So why do we care? Well, if we think about it, plant compounds are made of carbon and other elements, oxygen, nitrogen, hydrogen, phosphorus, all different things. And so those exact same compounds are also what we have in our bodies. Actually, some of the enzymes that the plants have are exactly the same enzymes that we have in our bodies. It's a one-to-one, it's exact identical in many cases. And so we have those elements to make the protein, sugar, starches, DNA, everything. And so what happens is the plant compounds, these chemicals now interact in our body if they can get in, and they can have impacts on our body that mimic normal things that would happen, but the plant compound is changing that. And again, dosage is really important here. All right, so what I want to do in the remaining time we have is I'm going to give you a few examples of different cool studies. So the first one we're going to talk about is Mexican yam and hormonal control. And for this, we're going to be talking about female reproduction. There's very similar things with male reproduction, and we can do the same thing too. And I'll see if I bring it in as we go along. Okay, so if we think about through history, females, as today, might have a problem with female fecundity. In other words, what I'm talking about is pregnancy. So you might have a female, especially back in the days in the 1800s, 1900s, where a woman's trying to get pregnant, but she's constantly miscarrying over and over again. And so there's ways that plants can help. In order, before we talk about that, I have to give you a little background about how reproduction works in the female body. And it's all under hormonal control. And so, because the plant parts are going to be really important there. Okay, so if we think about a female, and here we're going to talk about menstrual cycles. So when I talk about this in class, usually it's very interesting. Eric doesn't like to do this lecture. I have no problem. Oftentimes before we go the day of, we're like, hey, do you want to talk about it or should I talk about it? And he's like, reproduction, you do that, just do that. So I have no problem. I think it's fascinating. So with the female reproduction, also with males, by the way, it always starts in the brain. So we have a pituitary gland, I don't know, in the center of our brain, way back there, and it produces two hormones, LH, the luteinizing hormone, FSH, the follicle stimulating hormone. Guys, you have the same two hormones and it does the same two things, even though men don't have follicles, but we can talk about that later. So that hormone gets released. It's going to travel throughout, those hormones travel throughout our body, go all over in our bloodstream. And what's going to happen for women is that in the ovaries, on either side, what happens is the FSH, the follicle stimulating hormone, kicks into gear and it causes one or more of the eggs to what we call resume dividing, meiosis. So what happens is every female who's born has all the eggs in her ovaries that she's ever going to have, which is fascinating. And so once she hits puberty, then everything sort of unlocks, and every time there's a cycle that starts, the FSH is going to cause the egg to get revved up and get ready. The egg and the surrounding tissue then secrete a hormone, estrogen, and that egg and surrounding tissue are known as the follicle, so I'll use that term in just a bit. So the interesting thing is estrogen then has a carryover, and it's going to increase the amount of luteinizing hormone in the body. That luteinizing hormone now is traveling around the body, and the brain detects it and says, oh, okay, we have luteinizing hormone. I'm going to stop producing my LH and FSH because something's going on in the rest of the body. So it's a feedback mechanism. So we're going to go back to here, and I want to take you on to a little trip. We're going to zoom in on part of the ovary here. And so what, you probably can't see it from the back, and I'm going to find my, oh, I better not press that. What we have here is we have a new follicle developing, a new egg. And what happens first of all is the egg through time gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And then there's a time, what we call ovulation, where that egg and its surrounding tissue, the follicle, actually goes out to the edge of the ovary. And ovulation is where it's violently ejected out. The egg goes flying out. It goes into the oviducts and it goes flying down in the hopes of being fertilized by some sperm if they happen to be there. So with ovulation, there's a surge in luteinizing hormone. If you have a ovulation kit, a test, that's what it's looking for, is the surge in LH. So again, the follicle is going to rupture, and I'm making a point about this saying that it's rupturing because for some women, they can actually feel it. And so it's a sharp pain that might happen. It could be on either side. Some women ovulate from both, so you can have two pains. And there's a name for this in German, Metzelschmerz, is this sudden pain. So I always make a joke in class. It's like, yeah, you could have a woman at a party and be like, oh, I've ovulated. So when I have my class, it's always fun because afterwards, they'll come up to me days later and they're like, oh my God, I was at this party and I started telling them about ovulation and I thought it was so cool and everyone looked at me like I was silly. I'm like, yes, I got to you. So then what happens is after the egg goes flying out, we have what's called, the remainder part becomes what's known as the corpus luteum. So this secretes progesterone and estrogen. And so this is the key. So I want you to remember this. So now we have progesterone and estrogen being pumped out by this remaining piece after the egg has flown out. And so the thing here is progesterone and estrogen inhibit FSH and LH. And so in other words, they're inhibiting a new egg from being developed. So now the brain is not going to be releasing more FSH and LH. It's like, whoa, something just happened. Let me hold on. Let's see what happens. And so over time, though, if there's no fertilization, the corpus luteum is going to disintegrate. The progesterone and estrogen levels now decrease, and then now FSH comes up, and now the brain is going to kick in and release more of the FSH and LH. Now, the corpus luteum, if there's a pregnancy, that doesn't happen. It stays intact, and so that's where you keep having the progesterone, and estrogen levels are still high. So essentially, if it does disintegrate, you just go around back into the other cycle. So the point here is, the reason I'm giving you all this information is it comes down to progesterone and estrogen. So if we can give someone progesterone and estrogen at a certain time, that would actually prevent new egg development. So it sort of freezes the cycle in one time period. Alternatively, if someone wants to get pregnant and they're having a problem, if we can give them progesterone and estrogen later on, as you'll see in a moment, that will actually help with a successful pregnancy because it prepares the uterus for implantation. So what happened here is that in the 1900s, progesterone was actually given to women who were at a risk for miscarriage. If they had a number of miscarriages, the doctors would say, okay, you need to have progesterone. The minute you find out you're pregnant, like start taking progesterone. And the reason there is that it causes the blood vessels in the uterus to actually start forming. So if a embryo travels down there, it can easily, I would say, dock into the uterus and be connected to the blood vessels and persist for a successful pregnancy. So in the 1950s, though, doctors realized that progesterone and estrogen given early in the cycle can actually prevent ovulation. And so the problem at this point was that progesterone was really expensive to obtain. The example is that you really needed 12 milligrams of estrogen estradiol for a typical treatment, and they got it from the ovaries of sows, pigs. And you needed 4 tons. So that's not going to work, right? And so for a time, only the very wealthy of the wealthiest were able to afford this. So in came the Mexican yam. So Dioscorea, there's different species, but this is what it looks like. And there was a doctor who figured this out. He was a Mexican physician, and he figured out, no one believed him at first, that you can actually use this plant and you can chemically extract a compound from it and you can make progesterone yourself. And it's true. So in 1939, he was able to show that you could take diosgenin, this compound, and then in the lab, you can more easily create progesterone. Because if you look at it, again, like this part is similar to this part. And so that is how today we actually have the birth control pill. It came from the Mexican yam. So regardless of what you feel about birth control, that's how it happened. Okay. Oh, I have so many stories and so little time. Okay, we're going to do the milk sickness. This is a good one. Does anyone know about the milk sickness? Okay, a few. All right. So the milk sickness comes down to this plant. You know what this one is? White snake root, right. And so white snake root is one of these ones where it changed its Latin name. So I know as Eupatorium rugosum. That's the old name, sorry. I always blame Eric because he's a systematist and he thinks this is a great idea to change names. But that's what it looks like. Here's the story. In the Ohio River Valley around 1818, a few years before and afterwards, we had a lot of what we call settlers coming down the Ohio River. They had purchased land and they came to cut it down, to have their farms, build their log cabins and so forth. At that time period, a strange thing happened. A lot of young children and young women who are nursing died. And they called it the milk sickness because the way that they linked it to it is that it always happened when someone was consuming milk. And so oftentimes, again, young children and nursing mothers who oftentimes would consume milk because they're nursing. And so for a time, they were very confused as to how this happened. A little incidental bit of history is Abraham Lincoln's mother, Nancy Lincoln, that's how she died. And so from milk sickness. So he was raised then by his stepmother. Okay, so that's what's going on. We knew that in dairy cattle, so it's linked to the milk, you look at the cows, they also got sick. And their milk that came out actually was red. Pink tinged. Means there's blood in it, right? And so the symptoms of the cows and the little kids and the mothers were that they would have listlessness, they'd had cramps, vomiting, constipation. Cramps and vomiting right away are like poison, that's something bad. And then what we knew is over time, their liver, their kidney, and then their muscles, it would just atrophy, it would just fall apart. And so the weird thing is this plant was sometimes used for kidney ailments. So we see a lot of that where people just didn't know. So today we know that it was due to this compound trimetol, and it's this compound you can see here, it's highest amount in the green plant. Even if you dry it, it's still there. And so we know now today that that plant has tons of that compound in it. It was being eaten by the cattle. Oh, and I need to back up. So what happened was people would come and they would cut down the trees. There'd be a lot of light, and you see a huge bunch of those plants suddenly start growing. So even today in the forest around here, you see a tree fall, and usually the white snake root like pops up like crazy. So it's normal. So they were cutting all these trees down. The plant popped up. The cows came along. They don't know any better. So they're eating the plant. Humans don't know any better. They're just milking the cows. And so that's what happened. So if you go to pioneer cemeteries around here around that time period, you'll see a bunch of tombstones of young children and mothers from that time period. So that's what it is. You guys want to do cancer or LSD? Oh, okay. You want to do the LSD?
Yeah.
Okay, all right. We're running out of time. I can send this to you later. You want to do this? Okay. All right. So cancer is a good one. So we can think about cancer in very different ways. It's just cell proliferation. It's a normal process of cell dividing, but it goes crazy. And so it can metastasize throughout our body in extreme cases. So the definition of cancer really is uncontrolled cell division and growth. So if you have a normal cell, normal cells do divide. Over time, they get old, they'll stop dividing, they'll die, new ones take their place. But with cancerous cells, something happens. Usually the DNA is damaged, and it just keeps dividing. It doesn't stop. It keeps going. And so that's why you have cancerous growth. So when we think about cancer and how can we stop cancer, we want to stop cell growth. And so we can think about how do cells divide, and mitosis is the name for how cells actually split in half. And what's really important are these, what we call mitotic spindles, these fibers that form and pull the cells apart. And so those are really critical to cell division. So Taxol is a very effective drug that's still used today, oftentimes for breast cancer, and I think also for lung cancer for different types in chemotherapy. And this compound, again, ovarian, breast cancer, in advanced stages, so it's really effective. And today, of course, with chemotherapy, you can use it in a variety of different combinations, extremely effective. And we know it's really good at stopping malignant tumor growth, and it interferes with cell division. We know why. So we know what happens with this compound is Taxol actually separates or inhibits the separation of tubulin, which makes up these fibers. So after the cells divide, you have to dissolve the fibers or the cell's like stuck. And so what you could do is that you make it so the cell is stuck, it divides, and then it can't do anything else. And so there's no future cell division. So that's how it works. So really, really smart. So here's the plant part. Taxol actually was developed from a plant known as the Pacific yew, Taxus brevifolia, shown here. It's only found in the Pacific Northwest. This is related to Taxus. There's a lot of Taxus species that you can buy in your yard. You know, it's a very common plant. It is, by the way, highly poisonous. A lot of people don't know that. And so this plant produces Taxol. It's also known as paclitaxel. If you see this, like the structure is really difficult. Like if you had to make that in the lab, that's going to be really hard. And so what it is in these trees, and so if we look at the indigenous peoples of the Pacific Northwest and we ask, hey, do they know this? Are they using this plant? The answer is yes. So they use this for a variety of different types of things, internal pain, as a blood purifier. So they were on to something well before we were. But what we found out is that there's a few problems. Now that we know Taxol's in this plant, here's the problems. One, in order to do this, you have to take it from the bark. So you have to debark the tree, which, if you know anything about trees, you're going to kill it, right? So you need, for 1 gram of Taxol, you need the bark from 3 trees. A patient needs 2 grams during any treatment. So right away, you're killing trees, right? So that's not extremely sustainable. The other thing is this is a very slow-growing tree. It takes 70 to 100 years old just to be able to be harvested. And furthermore, it's already rare in the Pacific Northwest because before we knew about this, these were considered trash trees. So when they went in the Pacific Northwest and they were harvesting for timber, they'd see these things, they'd be like, trash tree, you know, and they do clear cutting and they dump those. So 90% of the original population was destroyed before we knew that, oh my gosh, this tree is producing Taxol. So now we're stuck. The other thing, of course, as I referred to before, to synthesize this in the lab, it's really complicated. It's going to take 25 steps, very, very difficult, lots of money. It's not going to work. So here's the cool thing. So botanists said, okay, we're stuck. We know that this plant is really good, but it's not a lot of it. Let's look for relatives. And so that's what they did. So the English yew, Taxus baccata, by the way, this is the one that you might have in your yard. It's very, very common. Here it is in its natural environment, sort of a windswept on a hill, but this is the one you can use to make hedges. And the needles, this is cool. Now we're not talking bark. The needles, which we can sustain, we can pull off and not kill the plant, those have the abundant amounts of a precursor to Taxol known as baccatin. And so if we look at baccatin, essentially this structure here is sort of the upper right over there. And then furthermore, the other cool part, so you just take off these parts of it and you can add on the other sections. And it turns out this plant also produces a second compound known as taxotere. And so this compound is twice as effective as Taxol. And so if you notice, these two compounds, taxotere and Taxol, the only difference is this section right here. So they're so close, but this one, you add something different, twice as effective. So really, really interesting. So the last one I'll mention is turmeric. And so turmeric, very common plant. I'll put this up here. So it's a spice. So it's also the thing why mustard is yellow. It's also used in a lot of curry powders. It's used in sunscreen lotion. It's why the sunscreen lotion is that color. Chicken broth, it's all that. But it turns out that the compound here, curcumin, you can see it there, what happens, this is a totally cool way, a different way of treating cancer. So when a cancerous growth starts growing, the cells are starting to divide, eventually it gets so big that it can't just do that on its own. It needs a blood supply. So a lot of time what happens are these new tumors, if they're next to a capillary, to a source of blood and hence oxygen, then it sends out chemical signals and it sort of tricks the blood vessel to start growing capillaries to it. And once that tumor has more blood, it can start growing much faster. This compound is anti-angiogenesis, so it prevents new blood vessel growth. Totally smart. So, totally fun. Patricia, keep going? Yeah. Okay. Sorry, I'm getting too much into this. Okay, so what I want to do is psychoactive compounds. And so we're going to start with the Salem witch trials. You guys know about that? Yeah. So Salem witch trials, we had a bunch of young girls acting really strangely. People accused them of dancing with the devil in the dark at the midnight or something, right? And then, of course, the townspeople accused the girls, and they had to tell on each other, and it just was not a good thing. And so several of the girls and one of the men were actually killed, burned at the stake, and I think, Miles was stoned or something. Anyways, so that's what happened. So what happened at that time period, and we think explains it, is that in Salem that year, there was an infestation of what's known as ergot. Ergot is a fungus, Claviceps purpurea, and it's on wheat and cereal crops. And so this, I wanted to push the thing. So you can see sort of the fungal bodies hanging out there. And so what this does is it parasitizes the ovary. This is the fungus. Parasitizes the ovary. It's, by the way, is an STD. It's a sexually transmitted disease because the pollinators carry it from, for them, not for us. But I always like to tell students, you think humans are the only ones with STDs? Actually, no. And so around Salem, there's some evidence that there was an outbreak in the fields. And so if you look at it and you collect grain from there, the fungus essentially is part of that. And then you ground it up into flour and you use that to bake bread. And then essentially what that does is it causes hallucinations under the right amount, dosage. So what we think has happened is that led to the women, the girls in this case, hallucinating. This is also the source of what's known as St. Anthony's fire. Have you guys heard of that one? And the boys would have ate it too, which is interesting. Like, why the girls? So, why not everyone? So that's something we don't know. St. Anthony's fire was in the Middle Ages. In France, there was these epidemics where it killed thousands of people. And St. Anthony shown here, it's called St. Anthony's fire because around a chapel honoring St. Anthony, there was a townspeople never got it. And so they thought, oh, he's protecting his people. So it's called St. Anthony's fire. But what this was people would get this, and today we believe it's ergot poisoning, but they would start to hallucinate. They would run through the streets. They would scream that they were on fire, they were burning. They had violent convulsions. They were convinced they were being attacked by monsters. And then what you see in this picture, if you look closely, is there's hanging hands and feet, sort of morbid, right? And that's because their extremities would be blackened and fall off. It's a morbid way, and they die. So we now know today that likely was ergot poisoning. And that makes sense because of the hallucinations. Again, dosage, dosage, dosage. So if we look at this plant, on the positive side, it was once used to induce labor. And it was overprescribed in the US after that point. People, again, thought it was the greatest thing on earth. Too many people prescribed it. And so it led to a bunch of maternal deaths and stillbirths. Again, dosage, dosage, dosage. They probably got too happy and prescribed it too frequently in too high of amounts. And if you look at those deaths, what happened, the symptoms are consistent with chronic poisoning, vomiting, hallucinations, convulsion, death. But all is not lost. That compound, the ergot, then was used to develop a drug called ergonovine, and that's it here. And this is a drug that's used today. So this is used to treat postpartum bleeding, to prevent hemorrhage after childbirth, vaginal childbirth. It causes the contractions of uterine blood vessels. Extremely important. So in the search to actually, once we figured out, oh, ergonovine is so good, chemists were like, let's make an even better version. And so they started tinkering with this. And that led to LSD. Okay, so I'm going to take you on a little trip down LSD world, and then that might be the end. So again, dosage, dosage, dosage. So this is lysergic acid diethylamide, or just LSD, let's just call it that. And so what happened was the hallucinogenic properties, as it says here, were uncovered by accident. The story goes that there was a guy in a lab and he was playing around with it late at night. He was the only one. And he accidentally poked himself, I guess, is the story. And then he got on his bike because he had to go home. And later on he said, like, that's the craziest bike ride because he's biking down the road. And, oh my God, there's colors and everything. And he went home and he lay down for like a day. And then he was like, what the heck was that? So he went back in the lab, and of course he got his buddies, and they all started trying to, like, hey, what was that? And they all started testing it. So that's how we came to it. So it was popularized in the 60s. It's been declining for a bit. What we do know, it acts in your brain. So what it's doing is it's enhancing your serotonin, which is sensory perception, which makes sense. And it's also binding to your dopamine receptors. Dopamine is like your pleasure receptors, like when you fall in love, you exercise, dopamine. And so that makes sense. So those are things that regulate your body temperature, your sleep, but more importantly, your sensory perception. And so today it's the most powerful psychic drug known. And here's the interesting thing. Unlike other psychoactive drugs, which are addictive, this one is not. So the effect disappears pretty fast, and tolerance can disappear rapidly. So here's what it does. So it has enhanced perception. So if you're taking it, different sounds might be more brilliant colors. There's something called synesthesia. Have you guys heard about this, where your senses get switched? So if you're listening to an opera and you're hearing it, you might see like colored notes flying through the sky because it gets switched around. Your senses are swapped. Some people do this all the time, by the way. I found out, which I think is totally fascinating. But essentially, you have loss of normal perceptions. You also have heightened emotions. You also have extreme mood changes. And here's the downer. Your past memories can be relived. And that can be good memories, but it can be really bad memories. So you got to be careful. Here is an example. This is an artist, Hans Tiger, and he did a self-portrait while he was on LSD. And so you can see the face, if you can see that there. Very colorful, right? Perception. So if you don't see it, here's the lips. the nose, the eyes. There we go. Okay, so the final time here, what I want to do is I'm going to take you on an LSD trip. Don't get too excited. So, all right. So what happened was there was a test that was done in the early 1950s-ish. And so the US military actually were the ones who first started testing LSD. And they were trying to test it as a way for mind control with spies from other countries and things like that. And so what they did was they had a patient who's an artist, and they said, hey, we want to give you some LSD, and we are going to provide you in a room, and you're going to be safe, and we're going to give you a whole bunch of different types of things that you can draw. You can have charcoal, you can have pencils, you can have paint, anything. And they had a nurse, a male nurse with him, and the male nurse periodically would say, hey, why don't you get up and draw something? And so that's what they did. So after 20 minutes, here's his first picture. So here you go. So I have a running commentary. So the first drawing is done 20 minutes after the first dose of 50 micrograms. An attending doctor observes, the patient chooses to start drawing with charcoal. The subject of the experiment reports, condition normal, no effect from the drug yet. So here he's drawing his nurse. All right, here we go. Now we're going 85 minutes later. After the first dose and 20 minutes after a second dose, the patient seems euphoric. I can see you clearly, so clearly. This, you, it's all. I'm having a little trouble controlling this pencil. It seems to want to keep going. All right, now we have 2 hours, 30 minutes after the first dose. The patient appears very focused on the business of drawing. The outlines seem normal but very vivid. Everything is changing color. My hand must follow this bold sweep of the lines. I feel as if my consciousness is situated in the part of my body that's now active. My hand, my elbow, my tongue. 2 minutes later, the patient seems gripped by his pad of paper. I'm trying another drawing. The outlines of the model are normal, but now those of my drawing are not. The outline of my hand is going weird too. It's not a very good drawing, is it? I give up. I'll try again. 2 hours, 45 minutes after the first dose, so a few minutes later, whoa. Here we go. The patient tries to climb into his activity box, his box of things, and is generally agitated. He responds slowly to the suggestion that he might like to draw some more. He has become largely nonverbal. I am, everything is, changed, they're calling, your face, interwoven, who is? Then the patient mumbles inaudibly to a tune which sounds like thanks for the memory. He changes medium to tempera, so paints. So 4 hours, 25 minutes later, the patient retreats to the bunk, spending approximately 2 hours laying, waving his hands in the air. His return to the activity box is sudden and deliberate, changing media to a pen and watercolor. This will be the best drawing, like the first one, only better. If I'm not careful, I'll lose control of my movements, but I won't because I know. The saying is then repeated several times. The patient makes the last half dozen strokes of the drawing while running back and forth across the room. All right, now I got some time later. The patient continues to move about the room, intersecting the space in complex variations. It's an hour and a half before he settles down to draw again. He appears over the effects of the drug. I can feel my knees. I think it's starting to wear off. This is a pretty good drawing. This pencil is mighty hard to hold. It's a crayon. 8 hours after the first dose, the patient sits on the bunk bed. He reports the intoxication has worn off, except for the occasional distorting of our faces. We ask for a final drawing, which he performs with little enthusiasm. I have nothing to say about this last one. It's bad and uninteresting. I want to go home, is what he says. So, anyways, that's what it is. I'm going to skip this, even though it's so great. Jane Goodall. You know Jane Goodall? Oh, she was my idol. Okay, so what she did was she noted that chimpanzees actually self-medicate. I'll just give it away. So what they do is when they're in poor health, they actually do two different things with plants. They take whole leaves and they swallow it, and then it comes out the other end, and it has worms all stuck on it, on the Velcro. It's like a Velcro. It's a mechanical method of purging adult parasites. Because the chimps, you know, they stay for the night in their little nest, and then when they poop, they just put their, you have to not, they stick their rear out the nest and they poop, and so you can quickly collect the poop from them. So that's what they do. Humans also use the same plant in the same area of Africa to treat malaria and bacterial infections and HIV. So another one is this other plant, Vernonia, and this one they swallow, they don't do the whole leaf swallowing. This one they suck out the pith And it's really bitter, and but they get better. 24 hours, they recover. And so in Nigeria and Ghana, they actually use the same plant for various medicinal purposes. And we already know there's a compound in it, and it has anti-parasitic and antimicrobial properties. So the last thing, I'm going to skip these. Oh, we got to do the Lloyd brothers. We're here. So hopefully you know the story of the Lloyd brothers. Curtis Gates Lloyd is the botanist. And so he and his brothers were really important in the field of eclectic medicine. And so this is really focusing on whatever was best for treating the patients. And again, mostly plant-based, hence you'll see that when you walk around. And John Uri Lloyd, the brother, one of the brothers, he actually had the method to extract and concentrate pure compounds of these plants. And so that was really important in the early 1900s at that time period. And so that's one reason why we're here today at the Lloyd Library and Museum. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go. I had a few more because I got really fun. I was having excitement. So I was talking about bioprospecting. But what I want to do, since we're over time, is I just want to end here. And I want to let you know that we've sort of taken a trip. So we've started with history of what has happened in other parts of the world, stressing that traditional medicine is really important in the vast majority of the world today. And then what had happened through time is that there was this distance away from plants because people were like, hey, we can just make everything in the lab now. This is wonderful. We've now shifted that because if you think about it, we have drug-resistant bacteria, antibiotic resistance happening. The cancer fight is always ongoing. We don't really have a cure for cancer. We're getting close, but we don't have a cure for that. COVID, and there's always emerging pandemics. We're always needing to come up with new medicines. And then I would argue there's a lot of change now in the, well, hopefully, in the world today and recognizing the value of what we call indigenous or traditional knowledge in other parts of the world. And so there's really been this new shift to turning to plants to look for new drugs. In fact, a lot of pharmaceutical companies right now are hiring bioprospectors, they call it, to actually go around the world and try to identify plants of medicinal properties and bring it back for testing. And so we're like flipping this whole new paradigm. And so I think there's a lot of hope of what's going to happen. So I'm going to end there, but hopefully you're convinced that plants are really important for us.
Are the companies wanting to extract these from the plants or come up with their own local production?
Good question. Depends upon the company. So the question is, are companies extracting these from the plants or coming up with their own ways of replicating it? Again, the answer is, it depends on the company. Some are purposely going to find the plant and to locate it. Most companies, though, once they locate a compound, then they're trying to replicate it in the lab.
So they're going to continue to do so.
Yeah. And there's also pros and cons to that, but I would say it's also, you don't want to, there's cases where they've decimated natural populations in the past. So, but the good news is there's more companies are seeing the value in searching for new solutions in plants. And then ideally, if it's done right, that leads to some compensation for those individuals and then conservation of natural areas in other parts of the world and in the US. We need to do that too. I'm looking for Patricia. You're the...
One more question?
Okay. Do you...
Is there anything to do to alleviate the pain for LH surge from ovulation?
Oh, yeah. So I talk about that pain when there's that surge. Not all women actually feel that. I should mention that. Full disclosure, I used to have it. It was horrible. Not really. I mean, the whole, Tylenol, if you know you're about to ovulate type of thing. But I would say if there's severe pain, that's when you have to go to your doctor, because it could also be endometriosis. So that sometimes does happen. And endometriosis is you're okay, is the uterine lining is actually growing in areas outside of the uterus. So that can cause severe pain, and that's treatable. So I would say with any of that, you just go to your... your doctor and say, this is what's going on? Yeah, that's a great question.
We do have one.
I have an observation and a question.
Yes.
I told you earlier that I was a student at UC Biology Department back in the 60s.
Yeah.
And we never had a course like this. We studied all the exciting things like plant physiology and plant anatomy. So I wish I were a student now. My question is, it has to do with how people discover things. I was interested in archaeology, and I learned that the Maya used to use cacao
Yes.
as a medicine, but they took it anally.
Yeah.
And
Tobacco too, by the way.
yeah, right. But then the Navajo Indians, when a young girl reached maturity, at least for reproduction, they had a ceremony for the child becoming an adult, and they would dig up the yucca plant, and they would grind up the root and use it as a for washing your hair.
Like a soap. Yeah.
Soap.
Oh,
Well,
that, I didn't
how
know.
do they come up with these ideas? I mean, you talked
Yeah.
about some of them, but
Yeah.
how do you?
Yeah, a lot of it, well, so like what you're talking about is indigenous knowledge. And a lot of that, I think, is through trial and error. So someone at some point figured something out, and then it's passed down through oral tradition. But the interesting thing, like with the yucca root, so that's saponins, it's a soap. So the pioneers who went across, traveling across North America to get to the West Coast, they learned from the indigenous groups, like if you needed soap to wash your hands, you go find a yucca, and it works. I've tried it. It's cool, and they have these soapy things. But anyways, to answer your question, I think it's through trial and error. And accident. And also people were closer to the plants and their environment than they are today. But yeah, the accident is the important point. Yeah, good accidents. Even now. Yeah. My unhappy accident, I learned the bad way, is that you don't eat fruits of honeysuckle. Bad. So.
Can I just add an observation here?
Yeah.
You were talking about the sweet potato.
Yeah.
That, I think it was at a farmer's market that we were talking to some people passing by, and they were in that particular area. They had a population of people from some part of, I believe it was East Africa, and they had many twin births in that community.
yeah.
And the staple diet of their diet there was sweet yams.
And sweet yams, yeah. In Africa, there's also called a star potato, and they historically use it for sickness, but it's been shown to actually be really effective in treating HIV. So, yeah. Yeah.
So it treats an illness that didn't even exist. That's what I think it has properties that treats an illness that we didn't even have yet.
Yeah.
I mean, I just think that's
We didn't know it might have, yeah. Yeah, but that's the value of plants, because you never know in the future, what you might have. And then, did you ever see The Medicine Man? With Sean Connery?
Oh my gosh, so good.
She was a dork, I gotta tell you. It's a strong woman. It irks me. But it was a really good movie. If you haven't seen it, it's really powerful. Yeah. Yeah. So.
Well, Theresa, thank you so much. I'm sure what you're saying has, yes, resonate. A lot of things probably resonated, even just in the last few minutes. All very, very connected to the Lloyd Library. You mentioned people going out in the field to find these traditional medicines and plants and that sort of thing. They also come to the Lloyd Library, so they use our books on that. Our fellow this year, one of the things that she's researching is ergot. So I now know a little bit more what I can expect from that. So again, thank you so much, and I'd like to thank the audience for joining us today or tonight. Programs like these are supported by members and donors to Lloyd Library. Some of you might have even donated to when you brought a ticket. So if you supported us in any way, thank you very much. If you want to find more about becoming a member of the Lloyd, you can find that on our website. Thanks, and have a wonderful evening. Bye.